Thanks very much, Gavin. Good afternoon, everyone. And Gavin, thanks very much to you and the whole team, actually, at FE News for putting on today's conference. You know that Gavin's about the closest thing the sector's got to a national treasure. Anyone that's received an email from Gavin, please do frame those, because I tell you what, they're going to be worth a bob or two in a few years' time. Brilliant. You know, I love getting your stream of conscious on a Friday afternoon, Gavin. It's something I always look forward to. Look, this is a session really about progress for the sector. And of course, that word progress, if you look at the dictionary definition, broadly it means it's about advancement. It's about an endpoint, a destination that's better than where you started off. And I suppose when we think about our own part in this wonderful sector, the FE sector, for us it stands for further education, fantastic education. For too long, though, it's stood for forgotten education in terms of where we are when you look at some of the figures that we've already seen today around investment in the sector, and I'm going to say a bit more about that. But really, this session was about progress, and the way the lens really I'm going to look through. We've heard some brilliant perspectives already today. People looked at the whole challenge around the sector, around assessment, around education through a number of lenses. Really, what I want to do is look through the lens of productivity for progress, and in particular the 3 Ps. And really, the 3 points I want to make, and I hope in some form you agree, and they'll find their way into the report. That's what's also fantastic about this event today. It's not just hearing from plenary speakers and being talked at. It's interactive. It's about producing this combined report at the end. But I really want you to keep front of mind this notion of productivity, people and sector performance. Because in the end, although it's an awful word that economists use, productivity, when you think about progress in terms of human civilization, if you think about 300,000 years of us, Homo sapiens, being in existence when we saw off the Neanderthals all that time ago, although anyone that's been in the sector for a long time. Maybe you've got a line manager that still resembles a Neanderthal, so maybe we didn't see him off. We only invented farming 10,000 years ago. And actually, when you look at the whole struggle of human civilization, it's really 2 things. It's cultural evolution. We moved from being hunter-gatherer societies into being more organized social networks, to the challenge of technology. And it's forever, when you look back through the whole history of human civilization, it's that challenge around cultural evolution and technology. It's why before the first industrial revolution in this country, we had what were then, I guess, what we would sort of call now peasants, but people who were working the land who were afraid of this new technology called the stocking frame, and they petitioned Queen Elizabeth I to have the stocking frame abolished, really, in terms of the patents. It became, you've heard of the term Luddite. The Luddites famously smashed up stocking frames in the early 1800s. So when we talk about progress, we've got to think about it in those terms. And why productivity is so important to this debate about the sector and about our economy and about skills and about our workers is because given that we've moved on from slave-based societies, we've moved on from the feudal system, we're now on the 4th industrial revolution, the only way in which we as a society collectively can pay our way in the world is through productivity. It's through output per hour worked, if you look at it through an economic lens. And that's why when you look at, and I'm going to share these figures with you, what's happened then to UK productivity. I chose 1971 for no other reason than that was the year I was born, but it kind of gives, I think, a perspective on, think about in my case, my grandparents' generation who fought in the Second World War, my parents' generation who would come under the boomer label, although you talk to my teenage son, he keeps on calling me a boomer and I have to correct him that I'm technically Generation X. But 1971 is really the period now that economists call the Great Moderation. Britain has never was a more equal society in the early 1970s, and it started to become more unequal from that first OPEC oil shock in the mid-70s onwards. And really what that means in very graphic terms, when you look at that graph, for all of us as workers, as owners, as employees, whether we're self-employed or fully employed, is essentially it means that for most of our working lives, we lived under the sort of promise, really, the British promise was that society and real incomes would, year on year, grow in real terms above where we started, back to this idea of progress and advancement. So for the whole period, really, from when I was growing up and coming into the workforce in the late 1980s, on average, real incomes grew by 40%. So you were 40% better off in terms of your disposable income by the time you get to 2008 compared to where you were in the 1970s. What has happened since 2008, the financial crash, is that real incomes, on average, have only risen by 4%. So you do that comparison. As a society and as individuals, we've got wealthier by around 40% for that whole period from 1971 onwards. But then we've flatlined, and that's what this graph shows. To bring it down to our pay packets, what it means is that on average, if you'd continued, for example, that period of growth of around 2.1%, every single person in this room today, on average, would be £211 better off per week, or £11,000 per year. So go back to your line managers and say, I want a pay rise of £211 a week, please. But of course, to get that pay rise, the only reason why employers and businesses and firms can pay that money, because it comes back to this point about productivity and output per hour worked. If we improve our output, then obviously we can improve over time our wage demands and all the rest of it. People, this has been remarked on, I think, already earlier on in the session. But really, this is the point about investment. We hear that slogan all the time, don't we? Investment in people. People are our most important asset. Well, I've got news for you, ladies and gentlemen. I think we know this intuitively. The data doesn't support that mantra. The data over the last 20 years in this country, from an employer point of view, is that actually people are not our most important asset when it comes to investment in training, because if they were, why has the number of training hours since 1997 been slashed by 60%? Why, since 2011, have we lost 10 million training days in the workforce? And the reason why is because shareholder value and short-term profit has been put ahead of investment in people for productivity. And it's not just the employers that are not investing enough. Of course, as we know, the state, us, taxpayers through the state, haven't been investing enough either. And you see this in the figures around adult spending, where we've reduced investment in real terms by 2/3 since 2011. Finally, I'll end on this slide, and I'm always reminded when I give these sort of presentations, I look at some of the faces around the room. It's that Plato comment, isn't it? Is that no one likes the man who speaks the truth. But the reality is that when you look at the data and the metrics either stagnating, flatlining, or just going the wrong way in terms of investment, in terms of the regulation and the quangos that sit over the UK skills system, but in particular over the top of the English skills system, it's almost like it's in inverse proportion to the success of the skills system. So a decade ago, there were broadly around 3 quangos in the skills, apprenticeship and qualification space. It's now up to 7 quangos, all of whom have got a role in regulating qualifications, in funding. So I do think there's a discussion to be had about whether that kind of overhead, that sort of headcount over the top of the sector is really what we need going forward. Because it comes back to, I think, and I'll finish on this point, and I'm sure it's going to come out in the report, and I know it's what a lot of colleagues talk about in the sector. We have a very low trust model at the moment. We have a very top-down, Whitehall-driven approach. And in the end, we know the solutions to the education of our young people and our adults is in the hearts and minds and the skills of the teachers and the educators that work in our sector. So somehow I think we've got to find a way of wrestling that model back from a low trust model to a high trust one, because in the end, progress for productivity, ladies and gentlemen, is about people, it's about productivity, and it's about performance. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, I'm Deirdre. I'm from Coleraine in Northern Ireland originally, so I'm delighted to hear that AI is in high demand in my hometown. I won't introduce myself because the programme will give you some insight, but in essence, what I'd like to do is really just to that's a much younger photo of me, and I did have a different hair colour then. Gavin said 3 slides in 5 minutes, so I am going to endeavour to do that. So I have spent most of my professional life really looking at issues to do with how do people find opportunities. I grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and I saw what poverty, what discrimination, and indeed what violence can do, in a community. And so I've always been driven by a curiosity as to how can we help support individuals to find meaningful learning and work opportunities. So my first slide, really, I want to sort of build on the great presentations that we've had already, and just to build on what Thomas just said, I want to add place to that discussion that we need to have today around the future and how we can improve opportunities for individuals. And I think the importance of career development and progression is so fundamental to the productivity challenges that we face. And there are 3 things really that I think we all need to focus on, which is livelihoods matter. How do we support individuals to reach their full potential and to increase their well-being, and ideally to provide study and work satisfaction? I think the second thing is around places, local places, online spaces, for personalised support, and AI and some of the things that we've heard already I want to pick up on shortly. But as a society that is changing so quickly, we do need to sort of think about how can we support individuals to develop the confidence, the skills and the knowledge to be able to thrive and survive. And most importantly, in all our discussions about public sector services changing, education, further education, higher education changing, we've got to have those humans in the loop. The technological solutions, we've heard about the metaverse, virtual reality, gaming, chatbots, avatars, they may suit some people, but most will want some form of human contact. And so I suppose I want to pose a question to you as an audience, and I'll ask you to put your hands up. How many people here have either got children who are aged 11 or above, or maybe even like me, grandchildren? I haven't got an 11-year-old, but yeah. So there are 3 wicked questions I want to invite you all, whether you have children or not. So can you answer these 3 wicked questions? First of all, where do people go for career support? In their local communities? Where do they go? In Exeter yesterday or the day before, I saw a sign in a bus and it said, Job Help, hmgovernment.uk. So I went in and had a little look at it today. It doesn't connect with the National Careers Service, which is supposed to be there to be offering information, advice and job help. DWP have invested in a completely separate service from one which DFE have invested in. And of course, we have a careers and enterprise company, Quango, on the edges of all of that. So where do people go is the first answer, the first question. Secondly, what exists in their area and elsewhere? And most importantly, how do they access it? And I say that if we cannot answer those 3 fundamental questions, something is wrong in our society. And I've spent really the last sort of few years looking at this issue of transformation and career development and progression at an international level. And I think, first of all, what we have to move towards in this future perspective is co-design and development of community places and online spaces, including generative AI with humans in the loop. And if we look, for example, in Wales, if we have anyone from Wales, yes, in Wales we'll see that there are community hubs, schools that are actually connected to further education, higher education, coming together to put people and those communities at the heart of things. And I think that's one way in which we need to look at how we can get this art of the telling the truth. How can we get to those places where we've got more creative methods for sharing local resources for local people that make a difference to individuals' livelihoods. Secondly, if you've got an 11-year-old, or you know of someone who is an 11-year-old plus, how satisfied are we with the level of support that these children are getting around exploring possibilities for their future? And an earlier speaker mentioned primary schools, and our colleague from NCFE, why is it that we're not starting early? I did a piece of research with over 13,000 children in primary schools looking at career-related learning. And I discovered that those children are having conversations about their skills, the things they can do, their aspirations, the things they love. But when they make that transition to post-primary schooling, nobody asks them anything about that until they're at least 14 and beyond. So we have to fix the system around helping children and young people gather and accumulate knowledge about themselves, their interests and their can-do. And I don't think we do enough on that. I think the other point just to make is about decent work. And if you look at the stats, just very briefly, September vacancies are below 1 million for the first time since pre-pandemic. Youth unemployment is beginning to rise. And I think that should be a major concern to all of us. And the UK is the only G7 country to have lower employment than pre-pandemic. And the numbers of long-term sick are on the increase. I sound like doom and gloom, don't I? Let's celebrate all the things that are great in our education system and in our communities. But let's not lose sight of the fact that there are fewer potential workers for employers to recruit from. I think it's about 590,000 fewer over 50s in the labour market. So we have to actually reboot how we think about people making transitions and acquiring key skills. And also, I'm really pleased, and Gavin, thank you so much, that this conference has talked about inclusivity. Again, when we hear about migrants and we think about some of the rhetoric that's there, we're in Birmingham, a multicultural city. We have to remember that actually we have to design services that are relevant in a multicultural context. So my final point really is to say that over the last 2.5 years, I've been very fortunate to be developing as a female in the AI sector, I will say that, developing an AI careers chatbot. A brilliant course, if anyone wants to go on one, is called Future Learn, the Feminist Chatbot. I really recommend it. But we have to really look at how we can take the best of AI. The train has left the station, and now what we've got to do is we've got to move carefully with the sector, and this is what we've been doing with CC, the careers chatbot. The links are there. But one of the thoughts I want to leave you with is that in my research, I have been looking at, is it possible to train an AI chatbot to know the limits of its capability and to be able to refer to a human advisor? And we're on a journey with that. We know that AI now can empower the individual if they want to speak to a human advisor. They can be connected to a human advisor, and we're testing that out in a number of colleges and universities and a few schools at the moment. But also one of the advantages is that by using AI, we can actually help support the practitioners so that when Tom comes to see me, and I have only got maybe 15 minutes, which is a luxury in some cases. If you're in Job Centre Plus, you'll have less than 7 minutes maybe to deal with someone, that I will know where Tom has been with his permission. I'll know what he's been exploring. Is he looking at self-employment? Is he looking at courses? Is he looking at volunteering? And I'll know a little bit about him with his permission. And I think we have to move very carefully with the sector around how we put guardrails on AI. But progression, people, places, productivity, I think those are the perfect P's for me to end on. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Katerina Kolyva, I'm the Chief Executive of the Education and Training Foundation. The lens I wanted to use for the progression theme is very much a workforce and leadership lens, and a little bit borrowing a little bit from some of the things you talked about, Deirdre and Tom, and a very rich conversation indeed. If I were to ask you all, what do you feel are the top issues that you're facing in your own role in terms of workforce and your own workforce? You would probably say recruitment, retention, and well-being. Put your hand up if you agree. Sort of, yeah, half. If I go down the road and I ask those retailers what their workforce issues are, they're probably saying very similarly, recruitment, retention, well-being. If I go further down the road to the NHS hospital, they'll probably say the same. If I go further down the road to the school, they'll probably, or the university, if I go to Birmingham City University, they'll probably say the same. So I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that our issues are not our issues. They're not our sector issues. They are global issues. And given that we're all facing global issues, how do we use progression as a theme in terms of our thinking? And how do we indeed use systems thinking and understand that we are part of a wider system in our leadership and in our approach, so that we can play, if you like, a more politically astute approach to our thinking and looking at relationships and problem solving in a slightly different way. So I would invite us all to consider local issues being also global issues and being able to look at both. And I think AI gives us a huge opportunity to move away from being seen as just a sector that looks at the civic mission and the local communities, which we do, and we do very well, particularly in terms of social mobility. But I would invite us all to use AI to look more globally and think, in a different way. Similarly, AI allows us to think laterally in terms of on-campus versus online leadership, or indeed public versus private relationships, regulatory versus entrepreneurial ways of thinking and doing, further education, higher education and schools, rather than further education, higher education and schools. So there's a lot of that kind of systems thinking that allows us in our leadership to be more lateral thinkers. How does this thing interact? How do we behave in that kind of context where everything is up for grabs and we want to look at all those perspectives at once? Because ultimately we're all individuals and we're all individual professionals in our own right. So I suppose in terms of progression, we want to be looking both internally in ourselves in terms of what we need for our own individual progression, whether it is career progression, learning progression, system thinking progression, or indeed AI progression, just to give some examples. It can be different depending on our individual need, but being part of the system means that we also need for the system to progress to be able to support us. So that idea of professionalism being both about our own ownership and taking ownership of our own learning, our own continuous professional development, our own career progression, while the employer that we work with or the system we operate in is also one that is conducive to that progression for us. So it's both, I suppose. A couple of things from what Elena McGree was saying. I was very much enthused by how the systems thinking skills were as part of the skills that we need for the future, in addition to AI. So you're for me, you were talking about AI versus EI, so artificial versus emotional intelligence. And you talked about communication, teamwork, research, problem solving and creativity. And all of those things combined very much play to the wider systems thinking in terms of how can we solve a problem, but not just looking at the problem in my own little world, but actually looking at it in a much, much bigger and more creative, in a team working, in a networking way. And I want to kind of end with borrowing something from Tom, your trust, your high and low levels of trust, Tom, and how actually my observation, not coming from the further education sector myself, but having been immersed to it in this role over the last 7 months, is that we have a lot of things that are happening in a kind of an overway, and a lot of things that are happening in kind of an underway. So over a sector which is over-regulated, over-reformed, over-engineered, as you eloquently said, but it's also under-prioritized, underfunded, undervalued, and probably under-trusted as well. So I'd leave us with that thought of when we look at things a little bit from the outside and slightly bigger, perhaps all those things become a lot more nuanced. But our problems are everyone's problems. So I would invite us all to play that kind of wider perspective on them. Thank you.
That was great. I'm not surprised when it's 2 professors and a doctor on the stage to be sharing some really cool insights. Valentine, can you flick to Slido for me for a minute? And I'm going to try to do 3 things at once. Paul and Charles, do you mind joining us on stage, if that's all right? One thing I'd really like to ask, and to bring this in for everyone, and Katerina, you made a really interesting point, and Eleanor as well, around AI to EI. Do you know what I mean? So what are those transferable skills which we've got a really cool panel here, which are looking at productivity, careers, do you know what I mean? You're looking at people, but also bigger global perspective of what we need to invest in. Do you know what I mean? So what can we sort of focus on is a really good way to raise our productivity by using technology. I mean, Tom, I don't know if you wanted to kick off on what we can do, productivity in tech, and also what we need to maybe be thinking around for those transferable skills as well.
Yeah, hopefully this works. Yeah, you can hear me. I mean, as you heard from some of the debate this morning, I think we're still trying to figure out exactly the extent to which AI really is a productivity game changer, or in actually the words of an economist called Darren Ashimoglu, who's just actually, and I encourage you to put it on your Christmas reading list, an amazing book called Power and Progress, actually, a theme of this session, because he talks about so-so jobs that have been created as a result of technology. And I think what he means by that is it's fine, obviously, to have AI as a tool to augment our cognitive abilities. But if they are just replacing people and their jobs, it's back to that sort of stocking frame example I gave from the 16th and then the early 18th century. This is where it really rubs up against how people feel out there in our society. If they see the deletion of jobs and jobs being destroyed at a faster rate than jobs are being created, then it's going to be very hard to sell the benefits of AI. And I think we're still in this mode where we're not quite sure the extent to which AI could be a real game changer, could help with that output per hour worked, or actually it's just another excuse for sort of capitalism to really just throw people off to the wayside and say, you're now replaced by a robot, by a machine, by an algorithm. And I don't know the answer to that, but I think that's the one we've got to get for the sector over the coming, and for society over the coming years.
Does anyone on the panel have anything to sort of share on? Paul, I can see the mic going up.
Well, you've got to think, why is London, Cambridge and Oxford hotspots? And they're hotspots because they're an environment in which you're surrounded by skills. I mentioned the creative industries development in Manchester. And again, that was about a network of competencies. I think we've got to get away from, when thinking about employment, we've got to get away from an individual bringing skills which might improve their own social mobility, and more about the interconnectedness of skills which are necessary to run an AI environment. The sole trader is going to find it very difficult in an AI world. It's about teams of people who make a difference and who can collaborate. And so I think we've got to think in terms of progression as being a team effort.
Yeah. Deirdre, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, just briefly, I think pre-pandemic, we were very reliant on labour market intelligence, and we've seen some great labour market intelligence here. But what AI will allow us to do is to actually see what is the man and woman on the street actually searching for. And in a way, we haven't had, I think, that capability. So, for example, the chatbot I've been involved in we've been looking at anonymized data and seeing what is it that young people who are in schools or adults and young people in universities or in colleges, what sort of occupations are they searching for? And that's where we can use AI in a really empowering way. And we can also see the gender differences. We can also see whether more men use a chatbot than women, which is something quite interesting that we're beginning to see through some of the data, that's coming through. So I would invite us, when we think about the future, to sort of think about how can we actually get into the sort of real-life understanding of what young people, men, women, and other people of other genders are actually looking for, because we spend an awful lot of money on labour market forecasting, and I work at the Institute for Employment Research, who does a lot of that. But I want to flip that on its head and say we can use AI as social technology. It doesn't always have to be hugely disruptive, but it can be social and it can be used for good. And I'm delighted to see Paddy from City and Guilds in the audience, because City and Guilds have been one of our supporters for that. So thank you.
I saw two hands go up lightning quick. Katerina, do you want to?
I think sometimes we look at AI as something that we're going to lose. We're going to lose something as a result of AI, rather than the things we're going to gain as a result of AI. And I hear a lot of my colleagues that work in law worried about paralegal, because this is essentially a profession that we think we're going to lose to AI. But if we flip it back to education, if we're going to lose curriculum design or assessment or some tasks with being done differently or with AI, are we losing something, or are we gaining all those other critical skills that Elena was talking about? So that ability to do and to move faster in terms of that creative thinking and lateral thinking. So I think it's about lose and gain, and not just about lose.
I think just trying to add to the kind of debate, I think there is another aspect which is linked to productivity and around AI, which is about the ownership of AI, because the value and profits and capital gain that accrue to owning AI is obviously going to be immense in the future. And when we talk about productivity gain, we don't necessarily also look at how the equality of the dispersion of value and value creation exists. And one of the worries that I have is that AI is such a ubiquitous tool that, and it's concentrated in terms of ownership around kind of some very large tech giants. And the question that then arises is, does those bodies end up becoming effectively the real owners of the productivity that comes from that? And we don't end up having a more equal world, we end up having a less equal one as a consequence. So I think we need to think about both productivity, but also what the results of that distribution of wealth is from that.
That's a really good point, actually. Anyone have any questions on the old school with a hand in the air and use a mic, or do we want to go off Slido still?
Thanks, and an absolutely fantastic range of inputs across different topics. There's so many questions I could ask, but I'm going to home in on one if I can, which leads into the debate around productivity and that connection with automation skills, etc. And I wonder sometimes whether we do enough to really talk in very honest terms about what increases in productivity actually mean in lots of different sectors. Because I think sometimes different sectors struggle to understand what the skills connection to productivity is in their particular context. And then also oftentimes productivity can lead to unemployment, because it's not just about getting more from what you have. Sometimes the commercial reaction to that is actually getting more of the same from less input. So sometimes I think that sometimes creates a challenge in terms of talking in a positive way about productivity. Just interested in what views are from the panel.
Yeah, thanks for that, Paddy. It was a really good question, because actually one of the biggest challenges, and I don't say this in any way a party political perspective, but both parties, the red team, the blue team, the challenge for them at the next election is to turn round a British economic model that has put increasing labour supply and employment ahead of improving the quality of the British workforce. Now, you can understand why that is, particularly from a political point of view, in the sense that if you had a choice between mass unemployment and people actually in work, however they're in work, subsidised through in-work benefits, and they've gone up hugely over the last couple of decades, The trouble is that if we focus only on growing the size of the cake, you know, GDP, national income, and we're not then also focusing through skills and investment on the quality of those jobs, all we're doing is that the size of the economic slice that we're getting, now, you know, the real incomes, the slice stays the same, even though the cake is getting bigger every year because there's more people joining the workforce. We've got 4 generations in the workforce. We've got brilliantly, you know, people coming from around the world, 1.1 million last year. My organisation helps verify their credentials. But we only grow the supply and just make the cake bigger, but don't make the slice bigger. This country ain't going to get any more prosperous than it is. And the danger is over the next decade and a half is we start to stagnate into just being a middle income country rather than being the rich country that our grandparents and even our parents before that enjoyed.
I think we haven't used the word marketisation yet in this conference, and it's not a conference, a collective, but the marketisation of education, let's not kid ourselves here, that when we think about what that philosophy and that approach has been, let the market rip and let's see what the effects are. We cannot and should not underestimate the effect of that marketisation of education, and that's not to say that public, private and third sector alliances, partnerships where we can bring in investment from others is really important. But the mistake that's been made, in my opinion, over the last 12 years is that the professionals who are actually at the chalk face of our education system, of our career system, of our other public sector services have not been listened to or consulted. And that's one thing going forward that we have to push hard for, is that you are all professionals in this room, you know your subject, and we've got to get those public, private, third sector partnerships and alliances reignited to actually address the productivity puzzle that presents itself.
Nearly out of time, which is really annoying, but I was going to ask, we've done that matrix at the begin with, and I'm trying to get us all to action, what are the practical things today that we could all do? And I want to mind, we've got a couple of ticks left, so if I could maybe ask all of you like individually. So for Tom, practical things that you would say we need to move to or start to move to increase productivity, what would you want to share?
2 things, right. On the demand side, you know, we need to get rid of the apprenticeship levy as it is. I know that might be unpopular for some in the room, but we need a proper workforce investment fund in this country because employers aren't investing enough. And I think we need a political class in this country that's brave enough to actually say that they're calling time on the idea of FE, meaning forgotten education, that actually there is that commitment over a parliament to boost real term spending on per pupil student funding post 16 by 40%. I can't see how else, you know, I mean, you get what you pay for at the end of the day, and we look at our European competitors and they're spending twice as much as we are on training and investment and productivity. So, you know, we have to tackle that elephant in the room, you know, whatever metaphor we want to use, and we have to take that message to the politicians, in my view.
Deirdre.
Return on investment. None of us should underestimate the scale of cuts that I think will come down the line soon, particularly, you know, if you look at Wales, for example, you know, they've already sort of started that discussion. So I think return on investment is an important evidence base that we can use, and there's some well-be factors around healthy workers, healthy individuals do return something like £13,000 to Treasury in terms of if it's sustainable, and I've got some research on that. But the return on investment isn't the only thing. We need the human stories to go alongside it.
Just flexible models of career progression. So I think what we see in further education is very much vertical and fast vertical models of progression. So in the same organization, almost in the same discipline, almost just going up the ranks rather than more fluid, moving in and out of sector, going private, going public, moving to other countries. And I think that's what AI will allow us to do. And it speaks a little bit to a point that was made in the chat about systems thinking and whether this is part of the curriculum. Actually, it's not about being part of the curriculum. It is about being about progression and practice. If we practice it in terms of our own choices and our own career progression, and if the employer is also conducive to being more flexible in terms of people coming in and out, that will then be more powerful than just adding it to a curriculum. And we are adding it in our leadership development, so we do have the systems thinking as an important component for that.
Paul.
Despite 20 years of assaults on their integrity, colleges remain major civic institutions and anchors in their communities. And they need to build on that and really involve themselves in the regeneration or generation of the local economy. And I'm thinking of, for example, the large college in Glasgow, which took a lead in the regeneration of the Clyde, and as a result of which it's now the biggest provider of marine technology training in the world. So I think colleges need to immerse themselves in the regional economy, make sure that the various elements are brought together under their chairmanship, and strike out for a new regionally based approach to skills generation.
Well, I'm trying to find something to add to these very erudite comments, and I just want to probably move it up onto a global perspective, because at the moment I think people are aware that the UK is pushing an agenda of trying to put itself at the forefront of AI, and sort of trying to align itself alongside the US in that. And I think to achieve that, one of the things that really comes through is we need to create a structure of flexibility and modular learning and qualifications that link into that allow for a much clearer view of kind of what we can gain and learn in these new skills. And in that way, I think it'll be much clearer for investment that wants to come and find and develop and support both the training and businesses and people around that. So that would be my kind of answer, which hopefully echoes some of the comments we've heard just now.
It's a really, really good point. I think also when you take that into account, the global scale, what you say about transferable skills, does that sort of mean like local skills plans? Are they sort of, are we focusing in the right places for that? We've run out of time. This is really annoying. I think we could have gone on forever. Thank you, everyone. That was a really cool session. And thank you, everyone, as well this morning. We're going to do lunch in a bit, so enjoy. But then we're going to be going into our working groups, and there's going to be 2 sessions of that. If you haven't realised already, you've got like a sticker on your badge. Your room allocation is literally at the back there where Tim is at the moment, and you can grab the rooms, and there's a map on there. And please, this is for everyone to be able to get involved, for everyone to be able to share their views and to help us get to these points. Everyone can do an action point today. Everyone can be able to share something which then can go to those people that need to hear. Wherever it is, we'll take it to them, So everyone, can you just say, join me in saying thank you to everyone for today, and see you at lunch. Thank you.